The wind was relentless that evening, churning through the dense forest like a sorrowful ghost, scattering snow across the earth as if erasing what once was. The forest had its secrets, stories of lost souls and whispered regrets buried beneath the white silence. Deep within this wilderness, tucked between snow-covered evergreens and shadowed memories, stood a lonely wooden cabin, dimly lit and weather-beaten from years of solitude. Inside that cabin lived a man named Daniel Whitaker. Daniel was in his early 40s, rugged but weathered by grief. Once a forest ranger, now a recluse, he had chosen a life of isolation after the accident that had shattered his world 2 winters ago. He had lost his wife, Lena, to a car crash during a snowstorm, just days before Christmas. Since then, Daniel had turned away from the world and taken shelter in the woods where no one asked questions and no one expected answers. On that particular evening, Daniel stood by the kitchen window, sipping lukewarm tea, staring blankly at the swirling snow. The fire crackled behind him, casting soft orange shadows across the wooden walls. The only sound besides the wind was the ticking of an old clock and the occasional groan of the timbers settling under the weight of snow. He was used to this silence. But then, a soft sound. Not a knock, not even a bark. Just a gentle scrape, barely audible, yet distinct enough to pierce the stillness. He frowned, setting his cup down. Grabbing the lantern, he stepped toward the door, his instincts sharpened from years in the forest. When he opened the door, the cold rushed in like a ghost. But that wasn't what made him catch his breath. There at the foot of his doorstep sat a German shepherd, its body trembling, fur dusted with snow, and one paw lifted gently into the air. The dog's eyes, icy blue and startlingly expressive, met Daniel's. They weren't begging. They weren't pleading. They were searching. The dog didn't move, didn't bark, just held his gaze, paw extended as if asking a question. Daniel stood frozen, unsure why his heart clenched so tightly. He hadn't seen a dog in over 2 years, not since losing his own. Toby had been Lena's best friend and had run away the day of her funeral. Daniel never found him. Swallowing a lump in his throat, Daniel opened the door wider. "Come on, boy," he whispered. The shepherd hesitated, sniffed the air cautiously, and then limped inside. Daniel immediately noticed the dog's paw was injured, lightly swollen and bruised. The poor creature was underfed, clearly lost, and had likely been surviving in the forest for days. He grabbed a towel, wrapped the dog gently, and knelt by the fireplace. As he inspected the paw and offered a bowl of water, he noticed the collar, worn, cracked, and barely holding together. The tag was faded, but he could still make out a name etched in rusted metal. Max. There was no phone number, no address, just, "If found, please bring me home." Daniel stared at the tag for a long time, heart aching with the quiet sorrow of it. What was home to a dog like Max? A place that had forgotten him, or something he was still searching for? Max settled quickly into the cabin, though he remained quiet, cautious. He slept curled by the fireplace, flinched at loud sounds, and sometimes whimpered in the night, echoes of whatever trauma he had endured alone in the snow. Daniel, in his own way, related too well, but there was something unspoken between them. On the third morning, Max brought Daniel a pair of his boots in his mouth and dropped them at the door. It made Daniel laugh, a rough, unfamiliar sound. That evening, he cooked stew and gave Max the warm, broth-soaked scraps. They shared meals in silence and sat by the fire with a growing understanding. Neither of them had meant to survive this long, yet both were still here. Daniel found himself talking again, telling Max stories about Lena, about the hikes they once took, about Toby, about the life that used to be. Max would listen, head tilted, those blue eyes focused, as if he were trying to carry some of the weight. And each night, as the wind howled outside, Max would curl at Daniel's feet, his body a warm, living reminder that grief doesn't erase love, it only quiets it. By the second week, Max's paw had healed. Daniel had started taking him on short walks along the frozen trail leading to the nearby lake. One morning, as they walked together through the snow-covered path, Max suddenly stopped, ears perked. Before Daniel could react, the dog bounded off the trail and began to dig furiously at a snowbank. Daniel rushed after him, confused. Beneath the snow was something unexpected, a small, rusted, wooden box. Max barked once, pawing at it gently. Inside were old photographs, torn letters, and what looked like a medal. It was a soldier's memory box. Daniel stared, stunned. He recognized the emblem on the letter. It belonged to a military unit based nearby during World War II. He'd read about them in local archives. They had used this forest for training. Many had gone to war and never returned. Was Max connected to this? Had he been trained to sniff out hidden caches? Back at the cabin, Daniel laid out the contents of the box and spent the night reading the letters. They were love letters between a soldier and his wife, pages and pages of dreams, fears, and the hope of returning home. And then it struck him. The name at the bottom of the letter. Yours forever, Private Thomas Whitaker. Daniel's hands trembled. It was his grandfather. He had never known much about him, only that he'd gone missing during the war. The box was a time capsule, buried beneath decades of snow and silence, and Max Iwara had led him to it. The next day, Daniel contacted the local historian. Word spread. The local news covered the story of the soldier's memory box found in the woods, and soon someone came forward. A woman named Clara, elderly and soft-spoken, called claiming she recognized Max. "He was my husband's dog," she said. "My husband. He died a year ago." Max ran off during the funeral. "We searched, but he was just gone." Her voice cracked. "He was trained to find things, lost things, buried things." Daniel didn't know what to say, but something inside him twisted, both in pain and peace. Clara lived just 2 towns over. The next morning, Daniel loaded Max into the truck and drove to Clara's small home. She came out trembling, tears already in her eyes. When Max saw her, he paused, then wagged his tail. He remembered. The reunion was quiet, emotional, and deeply human. Clara hugged Max as if holding on to the last piece of her husband. She thanked Daniel with a voice full of warmth, but also said something that surprised him. Max has done what he needed to do. He found what was lost. Maybe now, he can choose where he wants to stay. Max looked between Clara and Daniel, then slowly walked back to Daniel's side. That night, back at the cabin, Daniel built the fire higher than usual. Max curled up on his old rug, sighing contentedly. Outside, the snow still fell, but the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full. The cabin was no longer quiet. Daniel had started volunteering again, helping train rescue dogs, teaching children about forest safety, even giving occasional talks at the local library. The pain of losing Lena would never fully fade, but it had softened, reshaped into something quieter, more bearable. Max still carried his old collar, but Daniel had added a new tag to it. Max, lost once, found forever. Sometimes on cold winter nights, Daniel would still sit by the fire and think about the paw that knocked on his door, about the hearts that broke, about the love that remained. And in those moments, he'd glance down at Max and whisper, "You brought me home too, buddy." It was late autumn, leaves clung to the branches like memories refusing to fall, and the forest had softened with a golden haze. Max had grown stronger. His coat shimmered with health now, and his spirit was lighter, more playful. Daniel, too, had changed. The lines of grief had not vanished from his face, but there was warmth again in his eyes, like sunlight finally returning after a long storm. One quiet morning, while hiking with Max near the river trail, they came across a girl, no older than 11, sitting on a moss-covered log with her knees tucked beneath her chin. She was crying softly, unaware of their presence, until Max trotted over and gently nudged her with his nose. She gasped, startled, then giggled through tears as Max rested his head on her lap. Daniel approached slowly, his ranger instincts kicking in. "Hey there," he said softly. "You okay?" The girl wiped her nose and nodded. "I got in a fight with my mom. I ran off. I didn't mean to go so far, I didn't know where else to go." Daniel offered a gentle smile. You're not in trouble. You're just a little lost. Happens to all of us. She glanced up. Is he your dog? Daniel looked at Max. Something like that. They walked her back to the ranger station together. Her name was Emma. Her mother arrived in tears of relief. Before they drove away, Emma leaned out of the car and whispered, Thank you, Max. That night, Daniel sat by the fire with Max beside him. You just keep finding people, don't you? He whispered. Max didn't respond, but his eyes were warm, knowing. Weeks passed. The forest began dressing itself in snow again. One day, while gathering wood near the edge of his property, Daniel saw someone painting on a hill overlooking the lake. A woman in a green coat, hunched over a sketchbook, her hair braided down her back. Curious, Daniel approached with Max leading the way. She turned when she heard them. Her name was Mara, an artist who had recently moved into a nearby cabin to escape the city noise. She painted forest scenes, wildlife, and lost faces. Max immediately liked her, nuzzling her arm until she laughed and let him sit beside her. Over the next weeks, Daniel and Mara crossed paths again and again, at the market, on hiking trails, sometimes in shared silence on opposite ends of the lake. She was kind, with eyes that carried her own quiet grief. She'd lost her sister to illness the year before, and painting was her way of talking to the silence. One night during a heavy snow, she knocked on Daniel's door, soaked and shivering. My fire went out. I didn't know where else to go. Daniel welcomed her in, made tea, shared stew. Max curled beside her like he'd known her for years. Mara stayed until morning, and from that moment on, the cabin no longer had room for loneliness. That December, Daniel found an old notebook Lena used to write in. Tucked in the back was a letter she'd started for him, dated just days before she died. Daniel, I know you'll hurt when I'm gone, but I hope you don't stay hurt. I hope the forest gives you something back. Maybe a sign, maybe a second chance. Please let it in when it comes to your door. Please. He read it with shaking hands, and when he looked up, Max was there, watching, listening, his head gently resting on Daniel's knee. You were the sign, Daniel whispered. Later that night, he shared the letter with Mara. She wept and held his hand. No words, just presence. Spring came slowly, like a promise finally kept. Daniel and Mara began fixing up the cabin together. New shelves, new windows, a garden out back. Max had his own space, lined with soft blankets and toys from Emma, who now visited every few weeks with her mother. Daniel resumed his ranger duties part-time, helping lost hikers and teaching classes with Max by his side. Max had become a local legend, a symbol of guidance and second chances. People began calling the cabin the warm house. It became a place of stories, of healing, of warm fires and second chances. Visitors would bring old dogs, wounded animals, even their own broken stories. And Daniel would listen. So would Max. Mara painted the moments, every face, every paw print, every laugh, and filled the walls with color. One summer night, years later, Daniel sat on the porch with Max resting beside him, his muzzle now silvered with age. The stars above were sharp, clear, and endless. Mara leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. Do you ever wonder, she asked, what would have happened if Max never came to your door? Daniel was silent for a long time. Then he whispered, then none of this would have happened. I would have stayed in the dark. I think he found me, not the other way around. Max stirred, eyes flickering open. He looked at them, his tail wagging once. Daniel smiled. You did good, old friend. You brought everyone home. And beneath the stars, in the heart of a forest that once only knew silence, the world had rewritten itself into something beautiful. One paw print, one broken heart, and one warm light at a time.